Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining us. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm an e-learning evangelist here at eLearning Brothers. Today, we're going to be talking about how to give your learners more with learning experience design. This webinar will be recorded. We'll get a copy of it out to all of you shortly after the webinar has wrapped. We will also be posting it online on our blog early next week. To discuss with us learning experience design, we have Dr. Marty Rosenheck, our Director of Talent Development Consulting, with us today. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Rosenheck. We're glad to have you with us and excited to hear what you have to say.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. If you guys have questions during the webinar, please use the questions panel. I will try to bring those up to Dr. Rosenheck, or we'll try to answer those some of those questions behind the scenes to help things go a little smoother. We will also be using the raise of hands mechanic. That's a button that's right on your GoToWebinar control panel. If I can get as many of you to click that raise hands button right now just to make sure that it's working. We'll give you guys a few seconds to click that little button. It's a little hand there. All right, it looks like we've got 60% of you raising your hands, so that's great. I'll go ahead and put your hands down. Thanks for helping us out, and we'll be using that later throughout the webinar. Just so you know, one of the things we like to do afterwards is try to follow up as soon as possible. Sometimes it's just to get feedback. Most of the time we would like to touch base and find out if anyone needs some one-on-one clarification about the webinar topic after the fact. All right, without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Dr. Rosenheck. I'll make you the presenter.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Andrew. I'm going to show my screen here. There we go. All right, can you see it?
Looks great.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, welcome. I'm really glad to get the chance to be here with you guys and really give you a sense of some of my thinking on this. I just want to quickly say that I'm actually excited to become part of eLearning Brothers just actually relatively recently, and I'm glad to kick off things by sharing with you. Just very, very quickly about my background, so you get a sense of where I'm coming from. So I've been in the e-learning business in various forms, the learning technology business, since 1982, with the Apple II computer, and ever since then I've been working in the field in various different ways. So sort of from the beginnings of this field, and along the way I decided, to do this well, you need to really understand how people learn, and I did call myself an instructional designer. Decided though to go and do my doctorate in cognitive science, where I studied how people develop expertise and how to basically use technology to accelerate that process of developing expertise. And that's been the focus of my work and my consulting work for the past 20 years. And based on that, I've been able to think about this in a lot of different ways. And really, this idea of learning experience design is key. So I want to ask you, first of all, a question. How many of you consider yourselves a learning experience designer? So a raise of hands there, a virtual raise of hands. How many consider a learning experience designer?
Those hands are going up pretty quickly.
Okay.
Looks like about 35% of our audience considers themselves learning experience designers.
Well, that's good, because that's actually of course there's some self-selection here that you join this webinar, but that's great. And let me ask you this now: how many of you have learning experience designer? This is a two-part question. One, raise your hand. How many of you have learning experience designer as your official title? And two, maybe if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat what your official title is. It'd be interesting just to see.
So raise your hand if learning experience designer is in your title. Looks like that's a much lower number, closer to about 8% of people say that it's in their title. And those are coming in: staff trainer, senior analyst, e-learning consultant, systems developer, instructional designer, director of e-learning, e-learning specialist, manager of technical training, curation lead, and these are still coming in: HR specialist, instructional designer, staff trainer, e-learning strategist, developer and instructional designer, training analyst, e-learning architect.
All right, that's good. That gives me a sense. That's good. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, So it's interesting that so I think that term is starting to get some interest, and I think more and more we're going to be more officially using that term in organizations. So that was cute. So let's talk about let's talk about this. Let's talk about learning experience design. Okay. So first of all, I want to start with a quick story. Right. I want to tell you about a story about working for a large government organization, doing consulting for them. There are people, and I'll let you share who it is. There are people. It was Social Security Administration, and they. This is quite a few years ago. There are people, have a very tough job. They have to tell people about all kinds of processes and procedures related to disability, retirement, and all that. And basically, it takes a long time to develop the skills to know that stuff. And actually, when I asked them how long does it take to become proficient, they would say, well, first of all, what is proficiency? What do they mean? They didn't really know. But once we got into that, we realized, it could take 3 to 7 years after intensive training. They would do intensive, 2 months of intensive training, and then it would take 3 to 7 years. 3 to 7 years to get completely proficient. That was amazing. And so what we did is we worked with them to turn around things around and to set up a user learning experience design process that we didn't really call it that at the time, but that's what it was, to set up a systematic set of experiences that got them able to do their jobs within 6 months instead of years, and to do their jobs at a proficient level of performance. So it's possible to do that, and we're going to look at some of the principles behind doing that. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about proficiency, because I think that's a key term here. How many of you, raising your hands, have heard of the 70-20-10 framework? All right. So that framework, basically saying, look, 10% or so, and these, by the way, these numbers are very, very general, and they're not saying how things should be, but basically how things are, and it's borne out by research in cognitive science and how people develop expertise. A small part of our way to proficiency is through formal training, okay, e-learning courses, workshops, etc. Most of the way is through on-the-job experience and informal and coaching, asking people, doing stuff, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes. That's how we really learn. And whether we like it or not, after they're done with the formal training we develop for them, they're going to take all this time on the job to actually get proficient on their job. That's just the nature of learning. But there's a problem with that. The problem is that it's a haphazard path. It's a circuitous path, and usually after the formal training, they go out there and we don't know what happened. It's a black box. So what do we do? They might not get all the right experiences. They might have bad coaching. They might ask somebody who doesn't really know the best way to do things. And so one thing we want to look at with learning experience design is how do we optimize that path, the entire path to proficiency, okay? So for example, you can think of instructional design, okay? I used to call myself an instructional designer, okay? As focusing on instruction, formal instruction. That's that 10%, okay? But really, the whole learning process after the formal training is to get to proficiency is more than that. And that's what we want to think about when we think about learning experience design, the whole process. How do we get people proficient, including the formal? The formal is important, but not just not the formal training, but all the aspects of that. So instruction is only a small part of learning. Now, learning experience design, what I think is exciting about it is that it brings together a number of disciplines, it's a number of parent disciplines that come together and that we can draw on. Now, I'm going to share these with you. It doesn't mean we all have to be expert in all of them, but we need to start thinking about and learning about them and bringing in teams that have expertise in each of these things. One is cognitive science, understanding how people learn and the basics of learning, research-based, real learning science. Okay, that's a key piece. And I'm going to be talking a bunch about that. The other is an approach called design thinking, which many of you have heard of, which is basically a way of thinking about problems and creatively coming up with solutions, and not just not in analytical ways only, but in flexible ways, focusing on the person and coming up with creative solutions based on really deep understanding of the problem. Okay, and that approach can be very, very useful to the design approach. User experience design. The idea of learner experience design has kind of come out of that idea of user experience design, which is, of course, making websites look great, make the way things work. The whole idea of experience design, a lot of the principles of that we can also apply to learning experience. The other is content and design and curation. How do we use content and provide it as needed in the right way that's going to support that learning experiences? That's a key piece. How do we apply technology? Experience API, all the palette of technologies that we have, because that's what enables us to do stuff, to do things that we couldn't do before in providing great experiences for learning. And then how do we use data and analytics to track and manage all of that and make sure that what we're doing actually leads to results? So these are some of the kind of parent fields that that lead to learning experience design. And that's again, you don't have to be an expert in that, although I'll tell you, if I wish there was a master's program. If somebody wants to do this with me, let me know. That people learned all of these things, because that's the kind of person I'd want to hire. Okay, what I'm going to do for the rest of this presentation is talk about 10 principles of learning experience design. I'm going to say them fairly quickly now, but then I'm going to go through them as the rest of this presentation. So let me just give you a sense of them, so kind of a pre-organizer of what they are. 1. The core of all learning is the act, perceive, adjust cycle. Okay, we're going to get into that in a second. Acting, doing, perceiving, taking in what you've done, getting feedback, and then making adjustments, changing, reflecting. Learning is the active construction of mental models and skills through experience, feedback, and reflection. Number 3, we need to focus on outcomes, okay, and it's particularly speed to proficiency. This is a concept that I think is very important, a great way to look at what we're doing. Context is key, and people are at the center. Build a learning path with a systematic sequence of formal, informal, and on-the-job experiences. Okay, so that path, just like that arrow I showed you, that's the path to proficiency. Use master practitioners or experts to identify targets, what people should be able to do and what they should look like, and experiences that lead to getting to that target. Provide content at the teachable moment when it's needed, just in time, not before it's needed, but when it's needed. Embed learning in workflow, and use technology as an enabler. It's not the core, it's not what it's all about, it's what enables it to happen though, and it's really made possible stuff that we couldn't do in the past. And then use things like Experience API, which I'll talk about briefly, track what's going on outside of the LMS, not just in the LMS, and to build learning ecosystems and to be able to measure the results. Because if we're going to do all this, you got to be able to measure those results that we're focusing on. So that's it. That's all there is to it. So I'm going to share a little bit about each of these right now, and there's a lot more here as well. And by the way, there's if you contact us, I have a bunch of articles on a lot of these topics that go into a lot of detail. For this, I'm going to go into a certain amount of detail, but not all of it. Let's start right away. Let's get down to the core of learning. The core kind of piece of all learning is basically this process. We're starting over here. We act, do, learn by doing, by getting feedback or perceiving the results of what we've done, okay? And then adjusting what we do next. And that's the learning process. It's really simple, actually, very, very simple. And this is and actually it's a basic core of learning that it's not just humans, but everybody. I mean, this is how paramecium learn, okay? And actually even it's kind of a fractal thing. This is how single cell organisms learn, is how people learn, is how organizations learn. It's that cycle of learning. We see that cycle all over the place, okay? And so, with a paramecium, right, they're acting, they're moving around with their little cilia there, okay? And they're sensing stuff, like in this case, chemicals, they're perceiving, okay? And then they adjust, they're set up to, okay, if I perceive a good chemical like food, then I move towards it. If I perceive a bad chemical like a toxin, I move away from it. Basically, and when they start learning, because those, when they kind of go near stuff that's toxic, they don't like it and they go away from it. Okay? I mean, yeah, it's paramecium, but guess what? This is how we learn as well. Okay, think about, this is not my daughter, but I have a daughter who learned how to walk. Okay, when she learned how to walk, how did she learn how to walk? Did she? Do you think that she took an e-learning course on how to walk? Did she I don't know, read a board book on how to walk for babies? No, she did is she had sort of goal, okay, and she started trying, playing around, doing things, okay, and then she would fall and she'd make mistakes and she'd pick herself up and she'd get some scaffolding and support from us, and so she learned by doing, okay, she learned by doing, getting feedback on what she did, okay, and trying again, getting support, and so that process is the same thing for humans, okay, that's how we learn, okay, and that feedback, which is kind of that what we perceive. We can, as part of what we perceive, is the effects of what we do. You know, if I take too big a step, I might fall. That's the effect. Or I can also see what my mom did, and that's modeling. Or I can get some feedback and encouragement and coaching and support. Those are all forms of feedback. So we kind of course, with humans, it's a little more complex than with paramecium. So we kind of build on that. And what we want to do is look at how do we support that. And then the other piece is how do we start looking at how that all, what happens in the adjusting phase? What happens? Well, in the paramecium, it's very simple, sort of chemical reactions, very, very simple. But in humans, there's a lot that goes on in the mind for the adjustment piece. So that's where cognitive science comes in to understand how do we do this? How does this all fit together? And how do we make those adjustments that actually end up being learning? Now, what I'm going to show you now is something that is based on the information processing model of cognitive sciences, in a kind of a model or a metaphor for how we learn. And I'm going to go through this kind of quickly right now. I'm happy to go into detail. By the way, I do workshops on this, the science of learning for learning experience design, and I'm happy to do more of that. And there's stuff written about this stuff. So, but I'm just going to give you enough to see that it's this cognitive science stuff. While it's kind of science and it may seem theoretical, it actually is. I use it very much specifically to design learning experiences. I use these principles. So, for example, okay, we're going to get that feedback. We perceive, we act, right? We perceive that feedback, the effects of what we've done, okay, and then we adjust. Now that's what happens inside our heads, right? And so part of it. So what are some of those processes? There's our attention. What we perceived is based on what we're focusing on. If you're not paying attention, you're not going to notice it. If you're not focusing on the right things, you're not going to notice it. Okay, and your attention is partially driven by your goals, and your motivation is, and the motivation drives those goals, and also the feelings and emotions. Those are all pieces of that of the fact of how we think about and process what we're perceiving, and therefore it affects how we design things, and we have to take that into account. Okay, and all of that goes into what's called working memory. That's our stream of consciousness. Okay, because only things we can only manipulate things and do things that are directly in our working memory. Okay, and that's how the learning process happens. Okay, and then what happens is when you process it, it can go into our long-term memory. Okay, sometimes we have mental models or schema. Okay, ways of that we organize the world, and we have to build into things that we build learning so that we can build mental models that help us decide where to go and what to do next, and how to take in what to do with what we perceive. Okay, so a big part of the learning is adjusting those mental models, and how do we set up experiences to do that? And they can be different types. Episodic is through experiences and cases. And then those get turned into declarative knowledge, which is basically kind of principles, or procedural knowledge that's basically how to do things, and skills that become eventually automated. Okay, and how does that all happen? How does these things happen? It's through our reflection process. So that's a key piece. Because when we do stuff, it's reflection on it that we kind of work on it and put it into, make sense of it in working memory. Okay, this is a crash course on cognitive science. Okay, now isn't that cool? You're going to get cognitive science in a nutshell. All right, got this? Good. All right, so here we go. Now, there's a little bit more to it. Again, we can go into a lot more detail, but you'll see, I'll refer back to some of these things. One of the things that is a sign of an expert in the way that we do things is this idea of pattern matching. Okay, when we see a situation, when we perceive a situation, we pretty much automatically, often, eventually, especially as we develop skills, automatically say, oh, here's a situation, I need to do this. Okay, oh, that situation, I do that. And that's what an expert can do. I can look at the situation and immediately spot the pattern. Okay, that's part of our, a big part of the automating of our expertise and our knowledge and our learning. And then there's another aspect too, which is this idea of the knowledge shield. Okay, and this is the idea that we tend to not want to change our mental models. Once we have them, we don't want to change them. And even in politics, I'm not going to go into politics very much, but you think about it. We have now, for example, between Fox News and MSNBC, you have different perspectives that people kind of reinforce their own perspectives and are kind of very resistant to changing to others' perspectives. And that's true with learning all kinds of new things and changing that type of thing. So we have to take that into account. How do we help people change, overcome that knowledge shield? Because learning is changing our mental models, despite the fact that our minds are set up for good evolutionary purposes to kind of kind of keep stable and not change everything all the time until there's enough evidence that the old models don't work. Okay, if the models work, don't change them, right? And then finally, there's this idea of metacognition. And metacognition is basically kind of our thinking about our thinking. Oh, I got to reflect on this. Oh, let me think about this. Oh, I noticed that I'm keeping, I am not changing. Maybe I need to do something. So there's that aspect of things as well. Okay, that's a lot, but that's okay, because the point is that this idea in humans, unlike paramecium, this adjusting, there's a lot that goes on in here, and we can design experiences that take that to account, and that's how we can really think about developing those experiences that are going to really work, because we understand, we do it based on our understanding of how people learn. Okay. All right. Let me get on to the next piece here. So what does this all mean? Well, the point of it is that we actively construct our knowledge through skills, our knowledge and skills through experience. It's experience that enables us to go through this process and do all the stuff that we just talked about, and we actively construct our knowledge of the world. We are continually doing that, and that's what we've developed evolutionarily, is more and more complex ways of building these models of the world that then help us adjust and act based on what we perceive in the world. Okay, that's how we learn. Very simple. All right. Any questions? And again, let me know. I can send you more stuff on this, references, and also some. I do workshops more specifically on how all this applies to learning experience design.
So we don't have any questions on this subject. Lots of aha moments, but no questions on this subject at this point.
Okay. Okay, then let's continue. All right, so what does this all mean? As learning experience designers, what we do is we support and accelerate people's construction of knowledge and skills. Okay, I'm not saying, so what basically, it's not saying we give, we provide people with knowledge and skills. You can't just like tell somebody, in the study of expertise, you can't just tell somebody stuff and they become an expert. They got to learn by doing it. I mean, think about this yourself. Think about something that you're really good at doing. It could be a hobby, something at work. All right, let's do a little raising of hands here. How many of you, let's think of this cool skill that you have. Okay, I have one. I play blues harmonica. All right, things like whatever it is. Think about it. You got it in your mind? Okay, now think about how you learn that. Okay, how did you develop that skill primarily? All right, okay, we're going to do hand raising. How many of you learned that primarily through workshops or sitting through e-learning courses? Okay, raise your hands. All right, Andrew, let me know what the number is about.
2%, 3%.
Really? Okay.
4%.
How many of you learned it through experience and practice and trying stuff out and getting some feedback and coaching from people? Things like that, primarily. Doesn't mean you don't have the other stuff as well. What percentage? Okay, raise your hands now.
35, 40%.
Okay, and
raise their hands now.
Are sleeping? Or what? No, the rest of you, what? So the question is, but the point of it is, look, we do this stuff, we learn this stuff by doing. But look, now the other question is what percentage of the budgets of our organization is focused on the formal learning versus experiential learning, really focus on the job? That's the question. I'm not going to, think about that, okay? Because we know that is a very small percentage of how we actually learn. Well, how are we different than other people that we're in charge of helping learn their skills in the workplace, or we're not? Okay, so how do we take that into account in a systematic way? Because it's not easy to do. First of all, we got to start. So this is the process. We got to start with the context. All right. So the context is key. All right. We want to start with the learner, and this is the experience design piece is a big part of this. All right. And then, but also look at what is the job? What is the job context? So for example, if a lot of this is happening on the job, you got to look at, okay, what do people think? What do managers think about their role in coaching and supporting that? What kind of infrastructure is there? What kind of social support is there for learning? And is the culture there for learning? Is the culture, learning, yeah, we just have to send people to class or send people to training to get things done. Otherwise, that learning doesn't happen on the job. Or is it, hey, we're a learning organization, and those most successful organizations have that culture. So thinking about that is the key thing. Again, there's a lot on this, but that's gonna be kind of the lens. All right. And look, if you don't take that into account, a great design document or a design that doesn't take into account context will make a great paperweight, really nice paperweight, right? Because it's not going to get used. You can create and design the coolest thing, and I've done this. I made these mistakes in the past. One time I designed a simulation for learning for medical school for students to learn basically immunology type stuff, right? It was done very, very early on in many years ago, and it was great. People loved it and everything. It was put in 10 different medical schools, and it actually turned out that it sat in a lab somewhere and nobody ever used it. Why? Because we didn't take it to the context. The professors, didn't really integrate it into the way that they were doing their teaching, and they didn't bring it into what they were doing. And even though it could be very useful and people who did it loved it, it didn't work. Why? Because we didn't take into account the context. Okay, so that's a key thing. The other major thing is really, and this is obvious in a sense, but it's amazing how much we forget this sometimes, is, we got to focus on realistic goals. All right, what do your executives really, really care about? They care about outcomes, care about KPIs, actual key performance indicators. What are people doing? What's the impact on the business? Okay, that's the kind of stuff we need to focus on. All right. And one of the measures that I really like to talk about and think about, because I think it's relatively easy to measure and really important, is proficiency. Okay, I'm going to get into a little bit more of what proficiency is. The idea of speed to proficiency. How do you get people up to speed, as quickly as possible? And you think about that curve that I showed you. There's a line. Okay, so let's say this is a level of proficiency. How long does it take to get someone proficient? And what would happen if you could accelerate that process or increase the proficiency to a higher level? Well, that difference, okay, that movement, that translates into huge amounts of money. Think of a salesperson. If that person can get up to speed, up to quota, 30% faster, a third faster, how much money is that? What's their quota? It could be millions of dollars. If on the other side, if somebody is a repair person, their first-time fix rate goes up by only 20% or 30%. Think about what the huge impact is. So all of these things, you can look at that, and you can look at a baseline of how long it takes people to get to proficient. It's not how long training is. Everybody says, oh, we want training to be shorter. No, it's not about that. It's about how long until they get to be proficient, and not just. And 80% is often not good enough. I don't know. I don't really want a pilot of my plane to have gotten 80% and passed the test. I want my pilot to be 100% proficient. Okay, and that's true in a lot of jobs. That proficiency, you got to not settle, but settle for really top-notch proficiency, because that's critical, okay, to the effectiveness of the organization. And if we can speed that process up, and I believe that this process was setting up, and there's actually good research in this too, and examples that we can reduce the time to proficiency by setting up a systematic set of learning experiences and designing them in a systematic way to really reduce that time significantly and have huge impacts on the organization. All right, this idea of proficiency, I'm just going to give you an example. Again, we can go into a lot more detail on this, but basically, the idea, it's not, unlike a competency. Competency is kind of general, skills, attitudes, knowledge, skills, attitudes, right? You know what a competency is. But the proficiency takes things down to the next level, okay? Because you need to, when you're going to design a learning experience, you need to be able to, do specific things and focus on outcomes, not just the traditional learning objectives, what they know, things like that. No, but what can they do? Okay, measurable results, quantity plus quality plus time. I sell 100,000 of dollars worth of widgets a month at 15% profitability, reduces 50 panels per hour with less than a 2% defect rate. Very, very specific, using numbers. Okay, start there. What are the things that people need to achieve? Okay, because that's going to give you the great focus as to how to design these experiences that are going to get to that. And also, it doesn't have to be quantitative. It could be also observable actions, because someone watching someone do something, you can tell whether they're doing it well in terms of their, can a salesperson gain agreement on a customer's needs and issues through effective questioning, listening, and recap, et cetera. Here's a few other examples. Okay, so these are the kinds of things, and there's a process you can work through, and a workshop that we have on this too, on how to define proficiency and how to do that in a very systematic way. Once you have that, then you know exactly where you're going. All right. And one of the ways to get at this is to look at the experts or master practitioners. And I don't mean experts I mean experts in the sense of people who really can do this job well, right? The people who know about this job and have done it well, who have reached those levels of proficiency. You want to find them, the right people, okay, and usually more than one of them. And then you want to do this process of kind of harvesting, what are their experiences? What are the experiences they've had to be able to get to that point? What are the knowledge, how do they bring the knowledge to bear to those experiences? What heuristics and processes and procedures? So there's an example for one of our clients who was a water quality association. They had to learn how to put in basically install and service water softening equipment and water purification equipment. And so basically what we do is we lock these guys in a room. They actually enjoy it. They're smiling. But these are experts. And then we really look at what are the kinds of experiences and situations that you handle. Look at it that way. What are all the kinds of things you handle? And then have them categorize them and move them around. And that creates kind of the way they organize their knowledge. Okay. And then we can use that as a basis for setting up the learning experiences and a learning path. So it's not the typical subject matter expert type of thing, because it's really getting at what kind of experiences, what kind of did they have, and what kind of things can they handle, what kind of situations and cases can they handle, right? And so that gets at their knowledge organization, how they organize that, and how they solve these problems. Okay, and that sets the target. I want to be like that person. Okay, I want to be, and so we know. Okay, I need to get this person thinking that way. You can't do it, again, you need to do it only through experience. These people didn't develop their expertise by sitting in a classroom and being told stuff. They did it through experience. But we can make that very systematic and reduce that time. Okay? And one of the ways of doing that is create what I call a taxonomy of cases. So you take all the situations and you organize them in different ways based on the most prototypical cases. Because usually when we work with experts, they'll say, well, tell me all the things you do and situations you handle. And they'll say, well, we have an infinite number of things. There's a million things we do. Okay, fine. Let's write them down and put them on those cards like I showed you. And it turns out that usually you can get down to a very finite number of types of cases, and then prototypical cases, the situations they handle, and then variations on those themes. And it actually is almost always a manageable number. Okay, and then we want to look at what are the most common and uncommon things, and how do you organize them? What are the most simple tasks? Because usually in a learning path, as you'll see, you'll want to start with things that are simple and then build up in complexity. So we can get that from those experts. And then also the cases provide the material to provide the learning through the actual simulations, experiences, scenarios, stories. Okay, and that's what enables us to build a learning path of learning experiences. All right. Now, let's talk about that learning path and sequencing the learning path, and then we're going to get into the experiences themselves. So this idea of a learning path is a key. Learning is not an event; it's a process. We all know that. But how do you make that process systematic and go beyond just the formal, okay, and really get into what happens after the formal training, okay, or the formal training becoming interspersed and embedded on the job, okay? So how do we get the optimal path to proficiency? One of the aspects is how learning activities, whichever they are, how do you sequence them? And that's important. There are different ways you can do that. You can start very simply, because if you're going to work through having people learn by doing and working through cases, real cases, for example, or situations, you want to start with simple ones because, and that's the thing with Social Security Administration, when I work with their subject matter experts, this happens all the time. So we're going to start with cases and situations right from the beginning. They say, well, they can't. They got to learn this, this, and this, and this. And so, and the typical thing we do as instructional designers, and we've been trained in, is you break things down to the simplest parts, and then you give them all the information they need, and then they get to do it later on, apply it later. Well, we need to change that and say, okay, let's start with applying and doing things, learning by doing, but you can start simple and then build up in complexity, or give only part of the situation, the case. Okay. You can also organize it according to the process. If it's a sales process, you might organize the training. You may or may not, but it depends on the situation, according to the process, or a manufacturing process. That may be another way of sequencing steps in the other aspect is to think about is this idea of scaffolding. The scaffolding idea is that at the beginning of the learning path process, depending on how much experience the person has, they may need, at first they would need a lot of support, scaffolding, like scaffolding on a building, and then over time you take away that support until they can stand on their own. So this idea of scaffolding and then taking away that scaffolding, giving them a lot of support and guidance and hand-holding at the beginning of the process, and then taking it away over time. All right. Another thing in terms of sequencing is looking at how things are spaced out. And there's good and I know some of you might be spaced out. Sorry about that. That's a bad pun. But the point is, space practice is the idea, and this is a lot of good research on this, and there's a lot of good people who've done this for many, many years, is that, it's basically cramming doesn't work as well as studying or doing stuff over time. And actually, it's really interesting. So that idea of a learning path and trying things over time, practicing over time with time in between those practice periods, actually is really important. And that gives your brain time to consolidate the learning and apply it. Okay, so that's really important. Not only that, what's really interesting, more recent research shows that actually interleaved practice, so space practice, practicing one thing and then switching to something else and then switching back to that thing, actually improves learning. Very, very interesting that happens too. So how do we sequence things and make sure that look, the fact is it takes practice to get good at anything. And, very often we end up saying, oh, well, we only have time to do it once or twice or 3 times. Well, it can take 30 times to get really good, or take 100 times to get really good at certain things. You got to give them that practice. Make a sales call, be a really good salesperson. You got to do it lots and lots and lots of times. Now, that can be done on the job. I'm not saying it has to be done before the job. Some of it can be done in simulation. Some of it can be done in practice. Some of it can be done on a job. But think of it as intentional learning. Okay, and that practice, that idea of deliberate practice, that's how people get good at what they do. And that's obvious, right? Think about playing an instrument, playing a sport, whatever it is. You got to practice. Okay, that's true in our jobs too. So let's acknowledge that and make that systematic. Okay, and the other thing is, in the past now with technology, we're able to make it more adaptive too. So different people are in different places, different people learn at different rates. So if we can set up a learning path and use technology to say, okay, based on where I am now, here's what I should do next. Here's the best thing next. Okay, that kind of thing. More and more, technology is enabling that, and that's one of the things that we're excited to be able to do. One of our partners is, for example, doing that stuff very much with the military, using adaptive learning and using Experience API to track things where they are and how and where to go next. So that's a very exciting area too. Okay, so that's the sequencing. All right, then now what are we sequencing? What are the types of learning activities? Now we want to really start kind of digging into that. And we want to think of them as things that have to do with action and learning. So one, and this is a kind of in a sequence of kind of less removed to more closer to the job. So this modeling, observing something, watching somebody do something, right? My daughter watching me walk kind of gave her some ideas of how to do that. Watching, going on a ride along, observing someone, that's important. Not enough, and people spend more time doing it. You got to get them to do it quickly. Start doing quickly. You can also do cases and scenarios. It doesn't have to be real world stuff at first, but they can try things out, or just a quick scenario in eLearning. Okay, so and so had this problem. How did they solve it? How would you solve it? Boom. Okay, that's another way of getting to act, and that's mental action, and it's still action. Okay, working through something, a case, a problem, scenario. Okay, and then the next level is kind of simulations. Really doing, actually simulations of the actual activity. It can be virtual reality, it can be augmented reality, it can be online simulations, it can be live simulations. Okay, on the job, for example, we're just finishing up now training people, doctors and hospitals, doctors and nurses and cleaning people and everybody in a hospital. They're moving to a new hospital actually another week. Okay, and they need to operate and do everything perfectly in that new hospital. And we've done a whole bunch of these different pieces in the learning paths, and the culmination of, and some of that is actually simulations, and we're doing live simulations in the hospital before there are patients there, with actors playing the patients to actually make sure they can put it all together and practice doing it. Okay, so it can be live simulations, it can be online simulations, it can be augmented, virtual reality, etc. And then there's on-the-job learning, and this is a key piece. A lot of the learning happens that way. How do we make that more systematic? How do we enable the coaching and think about that on the job learning and partner with the organization, with the line management in the organization, with the departments, whatever it is, to make sure that on the job learning that happens in a systematic way as well, not just a haphazard. So this is just kind of a partial list. Actually, Steve Rosenbaum wrote a great book called Learning Paths, by the way, Steve Rosenbaum, and is working on a new book, by the way, too. He kind of put together this list. I've added to it and organized it a little differently, but basically, and it's roughly from more formal to more informal learning activities. You have a lot to choose from. Okay, we get stuck doing one. Oh, we need to learn. Let's do an online course. Oh, let's do, basically, let's do a video. There's a million things. There's a lot of things we can do, including on the job stuff and job shouting, visiting, taking photos, all kinds of things that we can do. Let's start looking at those and saying, okay, let's be creative and coming up with what's the best way to do this particular thing and what are useful ways of doing this. Okay, So again, I'm not going to read them all, but this is an idea just to give you a sense. There's tons of ways and activities, but we tend to get locked into a very small number of them. All right, so we got that learning path that leads to proficiency. Then the piece is there's content. All right, content is very, very important. Okay, as a matter of fact, some people say that content is king. Have you heard that expression? Content is king. All right, I'll grant you that content is king. It's very important. There's content management systems. You see content all over the place. How to get content. But if content is king, experience is the emperor. Okay? Content is king, experience is the emperor. Content supports experience. You just give people content, it's not enough to learn. You got to do stuff with it. You got to develop that expertise to apply it and use it. You do that, get that by doing. And then that content you get, if you can get that content in the process of doing, then that content is valuable. All right? But just in the abstract, it's really not that valuable. Okay? Experience is emperor. So what do we mean by content? Of course, the key thing we want to talk about is getting content to be on demand, okay, through a knowledge base, by quick short video and audio clips, social content, to get, asking people, getting people's information, from people in forums and things like that, checklists, guidelines, little tiny tutorials, okay, that just in time, just asking someone, that's valid. Okay, I've seen people learning how to use a POS system in a cell phone store, and they do it by they're texting someone else in another store. How do I do this? That's valid. Okay, and the idea of performance support, giving people the content, what they need, and the performance they need on the job, embedded in the workflow at the moment they need it, not 3 months before so that they forget it, but right at the moment of need. Okay, so what we want to do is look to ways to organize and provide the content and feedback at the teachable moment. Okay, that at the moment that people are trying to do something, either in a e-learning, in a simulated situation or the real situation, if you can provide that content at that moment that they need it, there's 3 things that happen. 1, they're going to be motivated to get it because now they need it. Okay, if you just provide, it's like just give them a whole bunch of stuff to read, they're not going to read it. You give them a problem to solve or something to do, and say, oh, here, you can look up the information to get what you need, then they're going to do it. Right, so it's motivating. 2, they're going to if they look it up and right before they're going to use it and they use it. This is a very technical term, but if you use it, you don't lose it. Okay, so 2, by getting them content at the teachable moment, right when they're going to use it, then they're going to more likely to remember it because they're actually actively processing it. Okay, and 3rd, that's very, very important, and this has to do with the whole cognitive science piece and the nature of expertise. If you give them content at that teachable moment, that content is going to be linked in people's minds to how it's used to solve problems. In expert novice studies, there's a lot of studies comparing experts and novices. One of the biggest differences between experts and novices is that experts, it's not so much how much they know, it's how they organize their knowledge. And now novices have their knowledge organized by like a nice outline, okay? But experts have their knowledge organized according to how that knowledge is used to solve problems, that pattern matching, okay? So if we can short circuit that process, it takes them 10 years to become an expert, right? We can short circuit that process by providing that content at the teachable moment when they need it, right? And so now I'm going to get into some examples, and this is just even things like developing e-learning. How does this apply? All right, who knows what this is? All right, write down what you think it is. All right, Andrew, when you got a couple of responses, let me know.
Sure, those are just coming in. Okay, pineapple upside down cake is the general response here. Fruit cake.
Yes. Yes. Well, fruit cake, yeah. Okay, let's go with the upside down cake. All right. So that's what it is. Okay, why do I have it that? Well, I think we start thinking about learning. Okay, and this is if you just take this one take home from for the way you're designing courses is the idea of turning it upside down. Remember, we've started with the traditional instructional design, break things down approaches, break things down to its smallest pieces, then present information, ask a couple of questions, then have them apply it, right? That's a traditional instructional design approach. What we want to do is turn that upside down, okay? Right? And then what you get is a beautiful cake. Why? Because now what you do is you can provide people, all right, with that, basically we call it the training upside down cake. I wrote an article about this, by the way, too. I can send it to you. I wrote it a long time ago. Okay, but basically you start with the scenarios and the challenges, and then provide the content they need at the teachable moment when they're motivated to use it, not the other way around. You can start with simple ones, but you start with real scenarios and things. And I say some things that some people really get mad about. I didn't write it down here, but is that in a sense, e-learning courses, all right, ready for this? Some of you are not going to like this. E-learning courses should have no content in them. Let me repeat that. Should have no content. What? Yeah. Well, actually, what e-learning courses should have is a bunch of scenarios and challenges and problems to solve, and then provide the content through kind of performance support or at that teachable moment through there. So you can link and potentially link to the real resource. Let me show you what I mean. All right. Let's take an example. Here's the Social Security Administration. This is something we did quite a while ago. All right. So she's got to learn how to handle these kind of cases. Okay. There's all these complex cases. So the e-learning, what we do is we say the whole e-learning is completely made up of case situations, right? And then you work through all these processes of these cases. Here's the situation. They're talking to you. You hear this person told the customer representative or that he's living with his sister, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't have household expenses, whatever. Okay. Question is, what living arrangement code applies? Okay. Instead of presenting all that information, we say, I don't know. Oh, that's a teachable moment. I'll click on the reference guide and I can see right then and there. Okay, so I click and it takes me to a reference guide. Now the reference guide is nice and organized according to that nice hierarchy, right? And it becomes, by the way, if you design this way, you get a twofer, because now you have a nice performance support reference tool that also is built in a way that is the content's relevant, because you're basing it on scenarios that are important scenarios based on the simulations or the scenarios, and that they can go and you take them right directly to the right spot. Here's the code that they need. Okay, but notice the whole thing is here. And so basically that that method gets that information that people at the teachable moment. They're going to apply it right away. They're going to remember it. They're motivated to learn it. Okay? And that's a great way to learn this stuff. They're actively involved in the learning. Okay. Now that can be done with workshops too. Here's an example of a workshop we did where it was salespeople. We did this internationally. This is actually in Japan. And but we went all around in this. And originally, those guys on the right, those are product managers. Okay, what they used to do is do basically death by PowerPoint. They bring people in, the distributors in. They give them this complex electronic product, PowerPoint presentations of all the different products. And guess what? It would go in one ear and out the other. They didn't get how to do it. Then we turned it around. We worked with them and come up with, okay, what is customer situations? And they wanted these salespeople to become more consultative and to kind of, they called it design in type stuff. So basically said, okay, here's client situations. Now here's blueprints for a particular situation, and maybe here's some things with mistakes in them purposely we put in there. And here's our catalogs of our stuff, or the online catalogs. Okay, now solve this problem for this client. And now, as they're doing it, they can ask the experts who are now on the side their questions at the teachable moment. So even with workshop, you can turn things around. And these guys were really into it, you can see. And they got into it, it's applicable, it's applied, they got to talk and discuss things and work it out instead of sitting through a boring presentation. So you can, again, turn your workshops upside down. Start with problems, have them work together in teams, and use the experts as guides and as references at the teachable moment. Or have the references online or in their books right there that they can look up the stuff, because that's what they have to do in the real world. Okay? Now, I want to also show how this applies in on-the-job learning. In this case, I want to show a piece of software that we actually built, and it's available. It's a software as a service called the Trek Learning Experience Manager. If you're interested in it, glad to show you a demo of this. I'm not going to focus on it, but the reason that we built it is that there weren't very good tools for managing and tracking the on-the-job learning process. Okay, and that's what this does. It optimizes the workplace development of workplace skills by managing and tracking learning paths that include formal, informal, and on-the-job, okay, learning. Okay, whereas an LMS is great for doing the formal learning, the courses. It's not so good for the rest. This tool is built to manage the entire process, and it can work with an LMS. It provides a coaching and a feedback cycle. Okay, remember that whole coaching and that feedback idea. We call it nano coaching, and it automated the tracking and reporting. So now, what's happening out in the field, you can actually track it and see what's going on, and be able to report on that and see the correlations to actual results. Okay. Let me give you a quick example on the job part of this. So, for example, we're talking about content at the teachable moment. So now on their mobile device, this is the Water Quality Association again. They need to perform, they actually did an e-learning course already on how to perform water tests. They've done a couple of different pieces in a learning path already on that. And now they actually have to go out in the field and perform a water test in a real situation. But even then, right then, before I'm going to do it, at the teachable moment, let me look up quickly on how to do that. I don't remember how to do it. Boom. Here's a knowledge base. They click, and it brings up a knowledge base. It's a full reference knowledge base. It sets on their own, which we built also. But then it's not part of Trek, but it's built separately. Sometimes often we want to go to information and knowledge bases that are already existing in the organization. Okay, now I see how to do it. Let me go do it. All right. Or maybe I want a video. Here's a quick YouTube video, or it could be a proprietary video right at that moment, not 3 months before, but right before I'm going to do it. They just the time. All right. So you get that learning path, the proficiency, get the content at that teachable moment, and then the key thing is the feedback. Okay, because it's not just doing it; you get the feedback and being able to reflect. Key part of the learning process, right? Because feedback that enables reflection and experience plus reflection is really what enables learning. All right, so feedback, how are we going to get to that? Here's our little cycle, remember that? Okay, that's that perceiving, you get that feedback. You want feedback as much as possible to be targeted and specific, very, very focused on what they're doing. And the reason it's important is that when you learn through experiences, those experiences kind of stay quite, like, as I mentioned, the idea of episodic knowledge. They're actually episodes. But what happens in action is you get the principles, the lessons learned, the heuristics, the rules of thumbs, all those things, and build the mental models that help us do the next situation. Okay, and you can give feedback in many ways with coaching, with Trek, we call it nano coaching, very targeted feedback using the online device, observation, social media. You can, ask people, getting the community, talking to people with peers. All these are different ways, or automated feedback. A good feedback even in an e-learning program. Or I'm using now chatbots or an AI, for example, give good feedback. And also sometimes you get the feedback just by doing it. You can see whether something worked or not. Oh, that didn't work. Let me try it a different way. Right? Those are all critical. And that reflection piece is critical. We need to be more, we tend not to really focus on that very well, especially the reflection piece and supporting that process. And that's a key part of the learning process. Okay? Getting that feedback and that reflection. So with Trek, for example, here's an example of how that works. So with the software, what happens is in the learning path, we go through that same cycle. Notice the act, perceive, adjust. So you execute a task in Trek. Using the mobile device, you share that evidence with a coach who is set up as your coach or his peers. You get feedback, okay, from them on that, and it can be remotely. They can be anywhere. They can reflect on that feedback. Okay, what do I do with it? And then they try it again. And they might have to continue again until we can set it up so that until your coach says, okay, you got it. Now I'm going to move on to the next thing. You might do that multiple times to get to the point where you're proficient. So that's an example of how Trek managed that process. For example, sales rep, this is a sales rep for the Water Quality Association. He's got to conduct a water test for a customer, right? And here's examples. This is the real world stuff. Remember, if you're not sure what to do, you can look at the video, okay, and there's the video on how to do it, right? But now I got to actually do it. All right, so now I record my results. You can put little things. This can be. There's an authoring tool, so you can put in whatever you want for them to have to do. All right, what was the hardness? 9 ppm. What treatment do you recommend? Install softener. Okay, where did it happen? There's a GPS to check in, so you were actually there. You can now to the evidence of what you've done, get feedback. And your coach, you can take a picture, do a video, you can do an audio, and then you can submit that to your coach for feedback. Okay, then now the coach gets a notification saying, hey, you got some feedback to give. And then we provide performance support for the coach. Now the coach, who's a manager, can see, okay, these are parameters. So when I look at this, there's the picture that he took, a JPEG, and I can look at the colors basically and give feedback. Oh, hardness of 9 p.m. is too hard, good recommendation. Okay, and submit that back to the learner. That's an example of creating a distance feedback loop and seeing and people capturing what they're doing out in the job. All right, so you can have different types of activities, overview, modeling, doing a task, different methods, but think about what's the reflection and feedback process at each of those steps. What kind of good feedback am I giving? All right, just a quick, that hospital I was telling you about, here's an example of the learning path for that. We started with some basic orientations and online learning that kind of get a lot of stuff, but those are all active types of online learning as well. They actually then went to the departments, okay, And then the equipment included hands-on labs and simulations of the equipment, online simulations and hands-on labs. And then they did actually, what they're doing now is these simulations in their departments, playing all the roles out to make sure it's all integrated. Next week, they open, the first patients come in, and we know already, we've done this before for other hospitals, that they're gonna do their jobs just perfectly. And people are gonna be happy. Okay, finally, I wanna get into just a couple quick things really here at the end, and that is that technology is a key part. That's our palette, okay? Because it's the technology that enables us to do this stuff, especially the tracking, the simulations and learning by doing through augmented and virtual reality, that stuff that we can help you do. The adaptive and AIs were enabling us to do that feedback, simulations, mobile learning, enables us to do on the job. That's what enabled all that on the job performance support. Of course, the e-learning, as you know, e-learning brothers were darn good at that. And and performance support, it's all technology enabled. And that's what it is, it's an enabler. It's not the core, it's not what it's all about. Learning is what it's all about, but the technology lets us do the stuff in great ways. And more, what's exciting is now we can do a lot of things we couldn't do before. Okay, so you can look at how to organize technology again, and we have workshops on this and learning ecosystems. But technology for having those experiences, simulations, virtual reality, augmented, scenario-based learning, simulators, and the content support, reference, and performance support systems, and chatbot, and tracking and management, which is critical. Learning management systems, and what TREC is, which is kind of a new category, learning experience managers, content management, adaptive learning, all these learning record stores. That's where xAPI, Experience API messages go. And then the business systems, they all have to be part of the learning ecosystem. They tie into those learning systems and then start correlating results, real. So Experience API, I wanted to mention this because this is really important. The TREC is built on that, and now that's enabling a lot of this. So SCORM, a lot of you probably heard SCORM, okay? SCORM is focused on content, making it interoperable across, okay? Basically, e-learning courses work on different LMS, okay? It was great for that, but it's only based on formal learning in courses. Experience API focuses on tracking experience, okay? That's what we're talking about here. All kinds of experiences, okay? Anywhere, everywhere, okay? The experiences that matter, okay? And that's what's exciting, is that's a simple way of doing that. The way that it works is basically it creates an activity stream, like a Facebook activity stream. I did this, okay? And that activity stream, so you have an learning experience, API, which is a connector, sends a quick message, so-and-so did this thing, to what's called a learning record store. And then that enables analytics and reporting. So this is the kind of the guts that allows us now to really have ecosystems that put this all together. So I'm going to end finally with an ecosystem, learning ecosystem. Okay, here's an example with veterinary systems. They had learning paths to learn the skills of working with animals, and let's say restraining a cat. You know what? You need good experience to do that, or you're going to get hurt. Okay. So we built an ecosystem. Work with them to do that. They had an LMS. Totara was the LMS at the time. They called it VetBloom. Had workshops, e-learning, etc. Built all those things. But then they used TREC for the real world experiences and doing the real stuff. Out with the animals, for example. And they did coaching, feedback, okay, and then certification and proficiency. It was all tied into the HR system and with single sign-on, of course. Then the learning record store, this particular one is called WAX LRS by Saltbox. That's stored all that information in there. That enables us to do things like, okay, you got all this done, you get a certification or a badge. TREC awards badges that we shared. And also, very much importantly, ties it to results, okay? And then allows you to do that analytics on those results. So that's basically what we have here. I know I've come right to the edge of our time, but hopefully this has been useful. And remember, these are the activity, these are the key principles. Again, I'm happy to share more with you. We're happy to do more anytime that you need, and provide you with some of this and expand out a lot of this. So thank you very much, everybody. And Andrew, do you want to do a quick closing? I know I've run right up to the end.
Sure. Yeah, we are running out of time. There's a lot of questions, follow-up questions, and clarification questions from people here in our audience. What I would like to do. Let me go ahead and put this information up on the screen. What we will do for you is we will get this presentation, the recording online, and you can watch it as soon as we can get it out to you, which will be in the next few hours. We're also going to try to get the PowerPoint presentation, some of these slides up on our in our free library, so it's quick and easy for you to access in the future if you have questions, and that'll be there temporarily. So you'll want to get that while you can and grab that from our free library. We also want to make sure that you have all of your questions about xAPI and this idea of creating an experience for your learners. Our custom side does do consultations, and we love to look through courses and see what we can do to help you and make your courses better. To learn more about that, just like the information says on the screen, call us 801-796-2767, or if you just want to email us and get some ideas that way, you can send an email to info@elearningbrothers.com. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosenheck. This has been great. We're getting a ton of great feedback, and we'll make sure to get you on another webinar in the future. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.